All right, let's dive right into a real head scratcher that sits at the very heart of the Christian faith. It's something that seems like a huge contradiction, and it brings up a pretty shocking question. Did Jesus actually tell his followers to break one of God's own laws? So here's the mystery in a nutshell. How in the world can the Bible say, in no uncertain terms, do not drink blood? But then later on, Jesus seems to command the exact opposite. I mean, that sounds like a massive contradiction, right? So let's unpack it. Okay, so let's put these two verses side by side and just see what we're dealing with. On one hand, you've got Leviticus, and it could not be clearer. You shall not eat the blood of any creature, period. But then you jump to the Gospel of John, and Jesus says, unless you drink my blood, you have no life in you. So what gives? How can both of these things be true? To figure this out, we've got to rewind a bit. We have to go back to that original law. Because before we can really get our heads around Jesus' new command, we have to ask a simple question. Why was drinking blood even forbidden to begin with? It turns out the context here is everything. You know, the key to unlocking this whole thing is realizing that not all laws in the Bible are the same kind of law. Theologians break them down into a couple of main categories. You've got what's called natural moral law. These are the big ones, the universal truth, like don't murder. They're always true for everyone, everywhere. But then you've got ceremonial law, and these were different. They were specific, temporary, ritual laws for the people of Israel for a particular time and a particular purpose. And believe me, this distinction is everything. That ban on drinking blood, it falls squarely into that second category. It was a ceremonial law. It wasn't like stealing, which is just plain wrong. This was part of a specific religious system that, and this is the important part, could be changed, but only by the same divine authority who set it up in the first place. Okay, so why? What was the point of this ceremonial law anyway? Well, it had this really deep symbolic meaning. For one, blood was sacred. It was set aside for sacrifices on the altar to make things right with God. It also stood for life itself, which, belongs to God. And on a practical level, it drew a really clear line in the sand between the Israelites and their pagan neighbors, who often had some pretty strange rituals involving blood. So it was all about holiness, life, and identity. Okay, so we've established it's a ceremonial law, a temporary thing. So how did it end? Well, that brings us to Jesus. And as you're about to see, this isn't a story about someone breaking the law. It's a story about someone fulfilling it. And you know what? Jesus himself addresses this head on. He says, don't think I came to just tear down the law. I came to fulfill it. He's not destroying the old way. He's bringing it to its ultimate point, its true meaning. It's like all those old laws were arrows, and they were all pointing to him. And you can actually see this play out step by step in the New Testament. First, Jesus himself says all foods are clean. I mean, that's a huge deal. It basically cancels out all the old dietary rules, including the one about blood. Then, a little later, the Apostle Peter has this crazy vision where God tells him to eat animals that were forbidden under the old law. And finally, you have St. Paul spelling it out, saying Christians shouldn't be judged on what they eat or drink anymore. The old rules have been completed. All right, so the old law is done, fulfilled. But this is where it gets really interesting. Because the secret to the new command was actually hiding in the old one all along. This is the big reveal. Okay, look back at that original verse from Leviticus. Remember how it gives a reason for the ban? It says, for the life of every creature is the blood of it. That little phrase right there, that is the key that unlocks everything. Life is in the blood. And this is where you see this mind-blowing flip. The logic of the old law was, life is in the blood, so don't drink animal blood, because that earthly life will pull you downward. Jesus takes that exact same principle, life is in the blood, and he inverts it. He says, drink my blood because my life is divine, and it will pull you upward to share in that divine, eternal life. It's the same principle, totally flipped on its head for a much, much higher purpose. So let's tie this all together. What does this actually mean for Christians today, especially when it comes to understanding something as central as the Eucharist? Now, whenever this comes up, a few common questions pop up. Let's just knock them out real quick. First, is this some kind of cannibalism? Well, no. The point isn't physical nutrition, it's about receiving a spiritual reality under the appearances of bread and wine. Okay, so was Jesus just speaking in metaphors? The text really doesn't suggest that. He used language like truly food and truly drink, and even let followers walk away because the teaching was so hard. And finally, doesn't it still break that old law? Nope. Because as we saw, that ceremonial law was fulfilled and replaced by Christ's new command for a new covenant. So what's the big takeaway here? Why is this such a huge deal? Well, first, it affirms what's called the real presence, that the Eucharist isn't just a symbol, it's truly Christ. It also frames him as the new and final Passover lamb. And it's seen as the main way believers receive his divine life into themselves. And you have to remember, back then, this was a massive test of faith. It required believing in something totally beyond what you could see. So you see, what started out looking like a massive, glaring contradiction actually turns into something incredibly consistent and powerful. The old law wasn't tossed aside or broken. It was brought to its deepest, most unexpected conclusion in Jesus.
And that really leaves you with one last question to chew on. What if the whole point of that ancient law wasn't just to forbid something? What if it was really there to set the stage, to prepare the whole world for the one person who would come and fulfill that law in a way that nobody could have ever seen coming?